They say life can change in a single moment. For Kendra Coleman, that moment came when she lost everything. Her husband, her home, and the life she thought she would always have. Betrayed by the people she trusted most, abandoned by friends she believed would help. She found herself alone on the streets, with nothing but a heart full of grief and a mind desperate for survival. This is the story of betrayal, resilience, and revenge. This is the story of a woman who lost everything and came back to claim it all. The sky was gray the morning Kendra Coleman buried her husband. Not the dramatic kind of gray that hinted at rain, but the dull, lifeless shade that made everything feel heavier than it should have been. The cemetery was quiet except for the soft sound of wind brushing against coats and the low murmur of people offering rehearsed condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss. He was a good man. Stay strong." The words floated toward Kendra and passed straight through her, like she wasn't really there. She stood beside the coffin, dressed in black, her hands folded tightly in front of her. Her face was calm, too calm for a woman whose entire life had just collapsed. Inside, however, her heart felt like it had been torn open and left unattended. Her husband had been her anchor, her safest place, the one person who believed in her when life became uncertain. Losing him felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. But grief, Kendra would soon learn, was only the beginning. As the ceremony ended and people slowly drifted away, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Her husband's family stood together a short distance away, whispering among themselves. They didn't look at her with shared sorrow. They looked at her with calculation. That was when fear quietly entered her chest. Later that same day, Kendra returned to the house she had shared with her husband. The place still smelled like him, his cologne faintly lingering in the hallway, his shoes still neatly placed by the door. She dropped her bag and sat on the couch, staring at nothing, letting the silence swallow her whole. She barely had time to breathe before the knock came. When she opened the door, her husband's older brother stood there with two unfamiliar men. One held a folder. The other avoided her eyes. "We need to talk," the brother said, his tone formal and cold. They didn't sit. They didn't offer condolences. Instead, they spoke in legal language, words sharp enough to cut through her fog of grief. The house, they said, was under the family name. The accounts, frozen. The business interests transferred. Her name, missing from documents she had trusted, were secure. Kendra felt dizzy. "That's not possible," she whispered. "This is my home." The brother didn't flinch. "You were his wife, not his blood." Those words shattered something inside her. By nightfall, Kendra was no longer a widow in mourning. She was a woman with an eviction notice in her hand and nowhere to go. She reached out to friends that night, people she had laughed with, helped, trusted. Some didn't answer. Some promised to call back and never did. A few offered sympathy but no solutions. Everyone had a reason. No one had space. When Kendra finally stepped outside with a single suitcase, the city lights blurred through her tears. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, not moving, not knowing which direction to walk. It wasn't just her husband she had lost. It was her life, her community, her sense of belonging. As the night grew colder, Kendra sat on a bench, hugging her coat tightly around her. For the first time, she allowed herself to ask the question she had been avoiding all day. How did everything disappear so fast? She didn't know it yet, but that night, cold, silent, and cruel, was the last moment she would ever be powerless, and the first step toward becoming someone no one would ever take from again. The city did not slow down for Kendra Coleman. Morning came whether she was ready or not. Cars rushed past the bench where she had spent the night, their headlights cutting through the early mist. People walked by with coffee cups and headphones, stepping around her suitcase as if she were part of the sidewalk. Something inconvenient but easy to ignore. Kendra stood slowly, her body stiff from the cold. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her husband's face, heard his laugh, felt the warmth of a life that no longer existed. She washed up in a public restroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen. Her skin looked dull. But she straightened her back anyway. I'm still here, she told herself. That thought alone felt like defiance. The first week was the hardest. Kendra moved from couch to couch when she could, shelters when she couldn't. She kept her suitcase close at all times, terrified of losing the few things she had left. She applied for jobs she was overqualified for and others she barely understood. Receptionist, cleaner, server, warehouse assistant. Some employers never called back. Others looked at her with suspicion when they saw she had no permanent address. Maybe try again later, they said. Later never came. She reached out to old friends again, this time with pride already stripped away. I just need a place for a few nights. I'll pay you back. I won't be a burden. Some didn't respond at all. One friend told her gently, I just can't get involved right now. Another avoided her calls completely. Kendra learned a painful truth during those weeks. People loved her when she was stable. When she needed help, she became invisible. Eventually, she found work. It wasn't glamorous. She cleaned offices at night, scrubbing desks that belonged to people who would never know her name. During the day, she worked at a small cafe, standing on her feet for hours, forcing polite smiles while her heart felt hollow. Her hands grew rough. Her body grew tired. Her grief grew quiet but heavier. At night, when the city slept, Kendra allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding in. She cried silently, pressing her face into her pillow, mourning the life she had lost and the future that had been stolen from her. But even in her exhaustion, something inside her refused to disappear. Months passed. Kendra saved every possible dollar. She skipped meals, walked instead of taking buses. She avoided mirrors because she barely recognized the woman she had become. One evening, while closing the cafe, she overheard two customers talking about relocation opportunities overseas, about starting fresh in places where no one knew your past. The idea settled deep in her chest. That night, she searched online at the public library until her eyes burned. She read about work visas, temporary contracts, opportunities abroad. For the first time in months, she felt something close to hope. Leaving was not dramatic. There was no one to say goodbye to. Kendra sold what little she owned, packed her life into 2 suitcases, and boarded a plane with a one-way ticket. As the city disappeared beneath the clouds, she pressed her forehead against the window. She didn't cry. Instead, she made a promise to herself, quiet but unbreakable. I will survive this. I will become someone no one can push aside. And one day I will return, not to beg, but to reclaim what was taken from me. She didn't know where life would take her next. She only knew one thing for certain. The woman leaving the country was not the same woman who would come back. The plane touched down just after sunrise. Kendra Coleman sat still for a moment, her hands resting in her lap, listening to the unfamiliar sounds around her. The calm announcements in a language she didn't fully understand, the shuffle of passengers gathering their belongings, the quiet efficiency of an airport that felt worlds away from everything she had known. She had relocated to a city where no one knew her past. That was exactly the point. As she stepped outside the terminal, cool air brushed against her face. The skyline rose in the distance, tall, clean, orderly. Everything looked controlled, precise, and distant. For the first time since her husband's death, Kendra felt small in a way that didn't hurt. Here, she wasn't a widow. She wasn't unwanted. She was just another stranger trying to survive. The first apartment she found was barely more than a room. It sat above a convenience store, the walls thin enough that she could hear footsteps and late-night conversations below. But it had a bed, a small table, and a window that let in pale morning light. It was enough. Kendra took the first job she could get, working long hours in hospitality, cleaning rooms, folding sheets with military precision. The work was exhausting, but predictable. No one asked questions. No one pitied her. She liked that. The city moved quickly, but it didn't rush her. Every day, she learned something new. How to navigate the streets, how to order food, how to exist quietly without drawing attention. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing the rhythm of life around her. At night, she studied. She borrowed books from libraries, watched videos, learned about business, contracts, investments. She remembered every mistake she had made before, every document she had trusted without reading. Never again. Pain had made her cautious. Loss had made her intelligent. One evening, her supervisor called her into the office. "There's a private residence looking for staff," the woman said. "The pay is higher. The work is strict." Kendra nodded immediately. She didn't ask questions. She had learned that opportunity rarely waited for certainty. The house sat behind tall gates on a quiet street. Everything about it spoke of wealth, controlled, understated, intimidating. Kendra was escorted inside, her footsteps echoing against polished floors. That was when she saw him. Yoon Jae-hyun stood near the window, speaking softly on his phone. He was tall, well-dressed, composed. His presence filled the room without effort. When he turned toward her, his gaze was calm, but distant. They exchanged brief introductions. "I expect professionalism," he said evenly. "No personal involvement." Kendra met his eyes without hesitation. "That won't be a problem." She meant it. At least she thought she did. As days turned into weeks, Kendra learned the rhythms of the house. Yoon Jae-hyun lived alone, surrounded by silence and schedules. His life ran on discipline and order. He worked late, ate alone, and spoke little. But he noticed things. He noticed how Kendra worked without complaint, how she moved with quiet confidence, how she never spoke about her past. And Kendra noticed him too. Not his wealth, but his loneliness. Two people, both shaped by loss, living under the same roof, pretending they were untouched by each other's presence. Neither of them realized it yet. But something had already begun. Life inside Yoon Jae-hyun's house followed a strict rhythm. Morning arrived early. The staff moved efficiently, almost silently, as if the walls themselves demanded discipline. Kendra adapted quickly. She learned which doors were never used, which rooms required extra care, and which hours were best left undisturbed. Jae-hyun liked things precise. Meals were simple and timed. Conversations were brief. Emotions were rarely acknowledged. At first, Kendra appreciated the distance. She had lived too long surrounded by chaos and betrayal. Here, order felt safe. But silence, she would soon learn, had its own weight. She noticed him most in the evenings. He often returned late, loosening his tie as he walked through the house, his expression tired but controlled. Sometimes he paused near the dining table, as if considering whether to eat, before turning away again. One night, without thinking, Kendra placed a covered plate on the table. He stopped. "This wasn't scheduled," he said, not unkindly. "I noticed you hadn't eaten," she replied calmly. "You can ignore it if you want." He didn't. That night, he sat alone at the table, eating slowly, his thoughts elsewhere. It became a habit neither of them spoke about. Small moments began to build quietly. He noticed she always replaced books exactly where he left them. She noticed the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He noticed she never answered personal questions. She noticed how his voice softened when speaking to his mother on the phone. They never crossed boundaries. But something human was growing between them. One evening, a storm cut the power. The house fell into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning through tall windows. Kendra lit candles carefully, moving through the space with steady hands. Jae-hyun watched her from the doorway. "You're not afraid?" he asked. "I've been afraid before," she said quietly. "This doesn't compare." He didn't ask what she meant, but he remembered the way she said it. That night, they sat in the living room, separated by space but connected by shared silence. Rain battered the windows. The city felt far away. "For a long time," Jae-hyun said suddenly, "I believed solitude was strength." Kendra looked at him, surprised by the confession. "And now?" she asked. He hesitated. "Now I'm not sure." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't a promise. But it was the most honest thing he had said in years. As weeks passed, Kendra found herself healing in ways she hadn't expected. She slept better. She laughed quietly with the staff. She felt seen, not pitted, not ignored. Jaehyun, too, began to change. He came home earlier. He ate regularly. He lingered in rooms where Kendra worked, saying nothing, as if her presence steadied him. Neither of them spoke about what was happening, but both of them felt it. Late one night, as Kendra finished her duties, Jaehyun spoke from the hallway. "Kendra," he said. She turned. "Thank you," he added, his voice low, "for the order you bring to this house." She nodded, feeling something warm settle in her chest. What neither of them understood yet was that this quiet connection, built without intention or desire, was already strong enough to change everything. Kendra had learned how to live quietly. Days passed in calm repetition: work, rest, reflection. Life inside Yoon Jaehyun's house was predictable, controlled, and safe in ways she had not experienced in years. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, she wasn't constantly bracing herself for the next loss. Still, peace had a way of making memories louder. Late at night, when the house slept and the city lights flickered beyond the windows, Kendra sometimes found herself staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting back to the life she had lost. Her husband's smile, the warmth of their conversations, the sudden, cruel absence. She rarely cried anymore, but the ache never fully left. One afternoon, while organizing old files in a storage room, Kendra came across a box filled with documents and photographs. They weren't hers, yet something about the careful way they were stored caught her attention. Family pictures, business awards, newspaper clippings, Jaehyun's life, captured in moments of success and solitude. She realized then that despite the wealth and control surrounding him, his life had been shaped by loss too. There were no recent family photos, no signs of companionship, only achievements. That night at dinner, she hesitated before speaking. "You work a lot," she said gently. He looked up, surprised. "It keeps things simple." "Does it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice was quieter. "It keeps me distracted." They didn't say anything else, but something shifted between them, an understanding neither had expected. A few days later, Kendra received a message that shook her carefully built calm. An unfamiliar name, a familiar subject. It was about her late husband's family. Someone had recognized her name on a professional document connected to her new job and reached out quietly. They didn't accuse her. They didn't threaten her. They simply said, "They're doing well, very well," with what they took. Kendra's hands trembled as she set her phone down. She had tried to leave that life behind, tried to convince herself that survival was enough. But the reminder reopened wounds she thought had healed. Justice had never been served. Jaehyun noticed the change immediately. She became more distant, more guarded. Her smiles faded quicker. One evening, as she prepared to leave the room, he stopped her. "You're carrying something," he said. "You don't have to explain it, but don't pretend it isn't there." Kendra hesitated. Then, for the first time, she spoke about her past. Not in detail, not with emotion, but with truth. "I lost my husband," she said. "And after that, I lost everything else." Jaehyun listened without interruption. When she finished, he simply said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't pity. It was sincere. That night, Kendra realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in years, someone had seen her pain and hadn't looked away. But with that realization came a quiet fear. Because healing meant remembering. And remembering meant facing the injustice she had survived. And deep down, Kendra knew this peace was temporary. The past hadn't finished with her yet. Change did not arrive suddenly. Crept in quietly, hiding in ordinary moments. Kendra noticed it first in the way Yoon Jaehyun began to look at her. Not directly, not boldly, but as if he was trying to understand something unfamiliar. She noticed it in how he lingered when speaking to her, how his questions grew less about the house and more about her thoughts. Jaehyun noticed it in himself. He found reasons to come home earlier. He paid attention to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. The silence that once comforted him now felt incomplete when she wasn't nearby. Neither of them acknowledged it. They both knew the risks, Jae-hyun had built his life on control. He controlled his time, his emotions, his surroundings. Attraction, in his world, was a weakness, something that complicated decisions and blurred judgment. He had sworn long ago never to let himself depend on another person. Kendra, on the other hand, was terrified of hope. She had loved deeply once, and it had cost her everything. The idea of opening her heart again felt dangerous, almost irresponsible. So they stayed careful. One evening, Jae-hyun invited Kendra to sit in the study while he reviewed documents. It was the first time he had done something like that. The room was quiet except for the soft rustle of papers and the ticking of a clock. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I don't mind," she replied. They worked in silence, existing in the same space without pressure. Felt natural. At some point, he looked up and said, "You're different from anyone I've ever known." Kendra smiled faintly. "Different isn't always good. Sometimes it is," he said. The words stayed with her long after she left the room. A few days later, they attended a small formal event together for the first time. Not as a couple, just employer and staff arriving separately, maintaining distance. But people noticed. They noticed the way he searched for her in the room. They noticed how she remained calm and confident beside wealth and power. They noticed how comfortable they seemed near each other without touching. On the drive home, the silence felt heavier than usual. "You handled yourself well tonight," Jae-hyun said. "So did you," Kendra replied. Their eyes met briefly in the rearview mirror. Then both looked away. That night, Kendra stood by the window in her room, watching the city lights. She felt torn between gratitude and fear. This place had helped her heal, but it had also awakened feelings she wasn't sure she was ready for. Elsewhere in the house, Jae-hyun sat alone in his study, staring at documents he wasn't reading. For the first time in years, his carefully ordered life felt unsteady. And for the first time, he didn't immediately want to fix it. They both knew something was changing, and they both knew that once the line was crossed, there would be no going back. The question was no longer if it would happen, but when. It started as an ordinary evening. The storm had rolled in unexpectedly, dark clouds blotting out the city lights, rain tapping against the windows with a soft, persistent rhythm. Kendra was finishing her tasks in the kitchen, moving quietly so as not to disturb the house's usual calm. Jae-hyun emerged from the study, still in his suit, loosened tie around his neck, sleeves rolled up. His presence was solid, unshakable, but tonight, it carried a tension she hadn't seen before. "You're still here?" he asked, his voice low but not harsh. "I had some finishing touches to do," Kendra replied calmly, though her heartbeat picked up slightly. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked closer, stopping just a few steps away. For a moment, the sound of rain and the distant city seemed to vanish. "Do you ever rest?" he asked, almost like a confession. Kendra looked up at him, caught off guard. She didn't answer at first. The air between them felt electric, thick with something neither had allowed themselves to acknowledge. The storm intensified, and the lights flickered. Candles had been lit earlier, casting long shadows across the kitchen walls. Jae-hyun's gaze fell on her, and for a moment, both were silent, aware of the unspoken connection that had been building over weeks. "I've been alone for a long time," he admitted quietly, his voice almost swallowed by the rain. Kendra hesitated. She had heard similar words from him before, but tonight they felt different, vulnerable, human. "I know," she whispered. "Sometimes, it feels like we carry the weight of things we can't control." He nodded, and that small gesture shattered a wall neither had realized was still standing. Hours passed unnoticed. They moved closer. Not physically, not boldly, but in small ways. A shared glance, a softened tone, a hand brushing against a surface where the others had just been. For Kendra, the warmth was both thrilling and terrifying. For Jae-hyun, it was unfamiliar, unsettling, but impossible to ignore. Then, one moment, simple and quiet, changed everything. A candle flickered near the edge of the table. The wind pushed through a small gap in the window, causing the flame to dance wildly. Jaehyun reached instinctively to steady it. Kendra's hand followed, brushing his. Time slowed. The connection between them, built in weeks of quiet observation and unspoken understanding, finally surfaced. They did not speak. They did not define it. They simply acknowledged it, a bridge that had been forming without either of them realizing it. By the time the storm passed and the rain softened to a drizzle, neither of them left the kitchen. They sat in companionable silence, hearts racing, minds reeling with the implications of what had just happened. For Kendra, it was the first time in years she felt safe letting someone see her without fear. For Jaehyun, it was the first time in years he realized he might not want to rebuild walls he had spent decades constructing. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration. It was something more fragile and more dangerous, hope. That night, as Kendra retired to her room, she felt an unfamiliar mixture of fear and anticipation. Something was changing, something undeniable. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small, dangerous thought. Maybe life can still give me something beautiful, even after everything I've lost. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the house, Jaehyun stared at the city lights from the study window. He had no words for the storm within him, no explanation for the way a simple touch had unsettled him so deeply. But deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same. The calm Kendra had built around herself was fragile, like glass pressed against a storm. She had begun to trust again, to allow herself small glimpses of hope, but the past had a way of following her, no matter how far she ran. One morning, a discreet envelope arrived at the house. No return address, no signature, only her name, written in familiar handwriting that made her heart skip a beat. Kendra opened it slowly, her hands trembling. Inside were photographs, documents, and letters, evidence that her husband's family had continued to prosper at her expense. Properties she had once called home, money she had been denied, and business ventures that had been quietly taken from her. For a moment, she felt the old pain, sharp and raw, as if the last few years had been a dream. Every betrayal she had suffered came rushing back, but this time it carried a new weight, opportunity. That evening, Kendra confided in Jaehyun. "I can't ignore this," she said quietly, holding the envelope tightly. "They took everything from me, and now, they think I've forgotten." Jaehyun listened without interrupting. His gaze was steady, calm, but there was a flicker of something deeper. Interest, concern, calculation. "You've built a life here," he said. "But if you want, you can take back what's yours. Carefully, strategically, without losing yourself." Kendra looked at him, surprised. He understood her in a way no one ever had. "I've thought about it every day," she admitted. "I won't let them win again." He nodded. "Then we make a plan." The next few weeks were a delicate balancing act. By day, Kendra maintained her duties in the house, her interactions with Jaehyun professional and composed. By night, she studied documents, learned local business laws, and quietly contacted experts to prepare for a return that would be methodical, intelligent, and unstoppable. Every action was calculated, every conversation a potential advantage. Her pain had become precision. Jaehyun, meanwhile, became her ally not just in strategy, but in emotional support. He offered advice, insight, and at times, silent reassurance when her courage faltered. Their connection deepened. Not just desire, but trust, understanding, and respect. One night, after reviewing a particularly important file, Kendra leaned back in her chair, exhausted but alive. "They think they can erase me," she whispered, "but they have no idea who I am now." Jaehyun looked at her, his expression unreadable, then allowed himself a small, rare smile. "They're about to find out," he said. For the first time since her husband's death, Kendra felt a surge of power and control. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to reclaim her life and rewrite the rules. That night, she stood at the window looking out at the city below. Rain from the storm a week prior had left the streets glistening, reflecting neon lights like shards of glass. Her reflection stared back at her, A woman no longer defined by loss, no longer silent, no longer afraid. I will return stronger, she thought. And when I do, nothing they took will remain in their hands. Somewhere in the house, Jae-hyun watched her from the shadows, quietly considering the storm she was about to unleash, and how much he wanted to be by her side when it happened. Kendra Coleman had never felt more alive. The city she had once entered as a stranger now felt like a chessboard. Each move carefully planned, each opportunity mapped and calculated. Every night she stayed up late poring over documents, contracts, and property records, each one a step closer to reclaiming what had been stolen from her. Yet despite the meticulous planning, her mind often wandered to Yoon Jae-hyun. He had become more than an observer in her life. He had become a confidant, a partner in thought if not yet in words. Their connection, once cautious and tentative, now pulsed quietly in every shared glance, every conversation that lingered just a little too long. One evening, while reviewing files in the quiet study, Kendra looked up to find Jae-hyun standing near the doorway, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. I thought you might need this, he said softly, placing one in front of her. Kendra smiled, a faint warmth spreading across her chest. You always seem to know exactly when I need something. He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Maybe I just pay attention. Their eyes met. The air between them shifted, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. It was not desire, not yet, but an undeniable recognition that the bond they had built over weeks was stronger than either had expected. The days that followed were a careful balance. Kendra continued her duties in the house, moving with the quiet efficiency that had earned Jae-hyun's respect. At night, she prepared her plan. Every action taken by her husband's family was being catalogued. Every weakness she discovered, every opportunity, became a tool she would wield. Jae-hyun watched her transformation with a mix of admiration and cautious concern. You're changing, he said one night as they sat in the study together, reviewing legal documents. Not just in skill, but in presence. People will notice. Kendra nodded, sipping her tea. Good. They should notice. I want them to remember that I am not the woman they cast aside. He leaned back, studying her. I've never seen anyone so determined. It's impressive. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but inside, she felt the weight of responsibility. Determination alone was not enough. She needed precision, patience, and timing. Then came the day she had been waiting for. A letter arrived at the house, formal, precise, and unmistakably from her husband's family. They were preparing a new business move, one that would consolidate their wealth further, one that directly involved properties and assets Kendra had once owned. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. This is it, she whispered to herself, a quiet fire igniting in her chest. Jae-hyun stood behind her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. And we'll make sure they regret every step, he said. For the first time since her husband's death, Kendra allowed herself a smile that was not forced. It was not relief. It was something stronger, confidence. She had the knowledge, the strategy, and now the quiet support of someone who understood her completely. That night, Kendra sat by the window, city lights reflecting in her eyes. They took everything from me, she thought, but they underestimated me. And somewhere nearby, Jae-hyun watched silently, recognizing the storm she was about to unleash, and feeling a surge of something he had long denied himself. Hope, because the woman standing at the edge of her destiny was no longer defined by loss. She was defined by power, intelligence, and an unwavering resolve to reclaim her life. The morning light spilled into Kendra's room, soft but deliberate, as if even the sun had taken notice of the woman who now lived there. She rose, precise and focused, the weight of months of planning pressing lightly on her shoulders. Today, the real work would begin. Her husband's family, confident in their control, had no idea she was coming back, not just to survive, but to take everything they had stolen. Kendra spent the first part of the day contacting lawyers, accountants, and old associates who had once worked with her husband's family. Each call, each meeting was conducted quietly, strategically. She learned of hidden properties, secret accounts, and business partnerships her husband's family assumed were beyond her reach. By the afternoon, she had built a small network of allies, people who understood her intelligence, her drive, and her determination. They didn't know her fully, but they respected her methods. Meanwhile, Yoon Jae-hyun watched, silently admiring her focus. "You're calm," he said from across the study, observing as she organized documents, cross-referenced dates, and outlined potential actions. Most people would be overwhelmed. Kendra didn't look up. Most people don't have to reclaim what was stolen with precision. I've spent years watching them build a world that never included me. Now I know exactly where to strike. He approached quietly, placing a hand on the back of her chair. "And you won't let emotions cloud your decisions?" She finally looked at him, eyes steady. "I've been too emotional before. Not anymore. This is strategy, not vengeance. Though a vengeance has its own satisfaction." He smiled faintly, recognizing both the warning and the truth in her words. That evening, Kendra made her first move. A property her husband's family had claimed, one that had been legally manipulated to appear under their name, was being transferred in a public record she had discovered. With careful coordination, she intervened through legal channels, asserting rightful ownership. It was subtle. No confrontation. No public spectacle. Just quiet, undeniable reclamation. The news, when it reached them, hit like a whisper of ice. Her husband's family didn't yet know it was her. They thought it was coincidence, a fluke, a clerical error. But Kendra smiled privately. She knew better. Jae-hyun, standing beside her as she reviewed the successful transfer, allowed himself a rare moment of pride. "You're unstoppable," he said softly. Kendra looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no arrogance, no gloating, just quiet confidence. "I've waited too long for this," she said, "and I won't stop until everything they took from me is returned." He nodded. "And when this is over, you'll have more than revenge. You'll have a future built on your terms." For a moment, the storm of her past seemed distant, replaced by strategy, determination, and the growing warmth between them. That night, Kendra stood once more by the window, city lights reflecting her determined gaze. One move had been made. Others would follow. Her past had tried to bury her. Her husband's family had tried to erase her. Now they would learn a new truth. The woman they discarded had returned, stronger, wiser, and more unstoppable than they could have ever imagined. Kendra's days had become a careful balance of precision and patience. Every call, every document reviewed, every legal motion made was part of a larger plan. One designed to reclaim what had been stolen and, at the same time, expose the arrogance of those who thought they had erased her from existence. Her husband's family had begun to notice the first signs of disruption. Transfers she had quietly executed were flagged. Investments they believed secure suddenly showed vulnerabilities. Confusion spread through their offices like an invisible storm, and whispers began. How is this happening? Kendra didn't need to hide. She only needed to wait. Yoon Jae-hyun became more than an observer. He became her strategic partner. While she executed legal maneuvers, he advised on timing, negotiation tactics, and reading people. He taught her to anticipate every move, every possible counterattack. "You're too meticulous," he teased lightly one evening, handing her a folder. "But that's why you'll win." Kendra glanced at him, a faint smile crossing her face. "I've learned from losing everything. Precision is the only way to ensure it never happens again." He studied her, admiration mixing with something deeper in his gaze. For the first time, Jae-hyun felt the pull of connection he had resisted for so long. Not just desire, but respect, trust, and something dangerously close to love. The first confrontation was indirect but unmistakable. An email from her husband's family, tone polite but edges sharp, arrived. "We've noticed recent changes regarding our properties. Please clarify your involvement." Kendra read it calmly, her fingers tracing the edges of the envelope. She could have panicked, could have played coy, could have ignored it. Instead, she drafted a measured response, asserting her legal rights, backing every claim with documentation, and leaving no room for misinterpretation. She hit send. The next day, she watched as confusion spread through their offices. They had assumed her absence meant weakness. They had underestimated her entirely, and she let them. That evening, she and Jae-hyun walked through the house garden, quiet under the stars. "You're different," he said softly. "The woman who arrived here months ago, she wouldn't have done this." Kendra inhaled the cool night air. "I had no choice," she admitted. "But now, I do. And I won't let them control my life any longer." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You won't be alone," he said, almost as much a promise as an observation. Her chest tightened. She had fought so long to trust herself again, to let someone see her strength without seeing weakness. And yet, here was a man who had earned both. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Properties reclaimed, bank accounts corrected, business contracts reviewed and amended. Every subtle victory was a blow to those who had once dismissed her. Every step was measured, deliberate, and unrelenting. Her husband's family began to whisper not only of confusion but of fear. Their confidence wavered. Their arrogance faltered. They no longer saw Kendra as a widow or a victim. They saw a force of nature they could neither predict nor contain. One night, after reviewing a particularly complex legal maneuver, Kendra and Jae-hyun sat in the study together, silence settling comfortably around them. "You've become remarkable," he said finally, voice quiet but sincere. "I've had no other choice," she replied. "Everything I've done is for justice, and for the life I deserve." He studied her for a long moment, then leaned closer, almost instinctively. "And for what we could have together?" Kendra's heart skipped. She knew the moment had come where she could no longer ignore the emotions she had kept buried. But this was a woman who had learned to measure every step, to plan every move. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned and erased. She was Kendra Coleman, and she was unstoppable. Kendra Coleman stepped into the city she had once fled, not as a woman broken by loss, but as a force no one could ignore. Every step she took radiated confidence. Every glance she cast carried purpose. She was no longer invisible, no longer powerless, and no longer afraid. Months of careful planning, legal maneuvering, and calculated strikes had led her to this moment. Her husband's family, once untouchable in their arrogance, now faced the consequences of their greed. The first confrontation was quiet but devastating. Her husband's older brother had called a meeting at one of their newly reclaimed properties, expecting the usual formalities. He was confident, sure of his control. He assumed Kendra would come hat in hand, begging for leniency or negotiation. He was wrong. Kendra entered, standing tall, eyes sharp, voice calm. Every document she had gathered was at her disposal. Every claim was airtight. "You've taken what wasn't yours," she said simply. "I've come to return it to its rightful place." Shock flickered across their faces. They attempted to assert authority, but every word they spoke was met with proof. Every objection countered with evidence. The arrogance that had once intimidated her now faltered in the face of her precision. By the end of the meeting, not a single asset remained in their exclusive control. Kendra had reclaimed everything. Properties, funds, and the dignity they had tried to strip from her. Word spread quickly. Friends who had abandoned her were now watching in awe. Rivals and colleagues whispered about the unstoppable woman who had returned stronger than anyone imagined. Kendra didn't revel in their shock. She felt only the satisfaction of justice fulfilled and the calm certainty that she had proven her strength, not just to them but to herself. That evening, she returned home to Yoon Jae-hyun. He waited in the study, papers untouched, hands resting lightly on the desk. When she entered, he rose and met her gaze. "You did it," he said simply. No praise, no awe, just acknowledgement. "I did," Kendra replied, a small smile crossing her face. "And I wouldn't have succeeded without your guidance." He stepped closer. "And now," she took a deep breath. "Now, I live my life, on my terms, with no fear, no regrets." Jae-hyun reached for her hand. And me? She looked into his eyes, the weight of months, years of pain, struggle, and growth reflected in the depth of her gaze. With you, she said softly. The connection that had begun quietly, through shared glances and subtle moments of trust, finally blossomed into something undeniable. Their bond was no longer tentative. It was rooted in respect, loyalty, and the shared understanding of loss and triumph. For Kendra, it was love rediscovered, not naive or rushed, but steady and earned. For Jae-hyun, it was a realization that life's walls could be softened without weakening oneself. As the night settled over the city, Kendra stood at the window, the skyline bright with possibilities. She had returned. She had reclaimed everything that had been stolen. She had proven her strength. And now, with Jae-hyun by her side, she could finally embrace a future filled not with fear or loss, but with love, power, and the knowledge that nothing, no one, could ever take her strength away again. Kendra Coleman was unstoppable. The city lights shimmered on the river below as Kendra Coleman stood on the balcony of her new penthouse. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of life below, a life she had once been forced to watch from the sidelines, powerless and invisible. She had returned from the shadows, reclaimed everything stolen from her, and rebuilt a life defined by her strength, intelligence, and courage. The woman who had arrived on foreign soil with nothing but a suitcase was gone. In her place stood someone unstoppable. Behind her, Yoon Jae-hyun approached silently. He didn't need words. His presence alone was a reminder that she no longer walked alone. She turned slightly and met his gaze, their eyes holding the unspoken truth of months spent building trust, navigating pain, and learning to allow love again. "I never thought I'd feel this safe," Kendra admitted quietly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You deserve it," Jae-hyun replied, his voice calm but steady. "Everything you've been through, everything you've overcome, it brought you here, to this moment, to us." For the first time in years, Kendra allowed herself to exhale. Not relief, not sadness, but pure, unshakable peace. The storm of betrayal, grief, and struggle that had defined her life was finally behind her. She had fought, survived, and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. And now, love was not a weakness. It was a choice, partnership, a quiet strength that would stand beside her as she faced the future. She glanced at the skyline again. The city that had once seemed so vast and unwelcoming, now a place of opportunity and freedom. Her past had shaped her, yes, but it no longer defined her. Kendra Coleman smiled, knowing that the next chapter of her life was hers to write. With Yoon Jae-hyun by her side, she was ready, not just to live, but to thrive. And somewhere deep inside, she whispered the promise that had carried her this far. "I am unstoppable. I am unbreakable. And I will never let anyone take my life from me again." The night embraced them both, quiet and infinite, a testament to endings, beginnings, and the strength of a woman who had risen from nothing to claim everything. The end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share to others. Also leave a comment to share your thought about the story.